Welcome to Richard and Greg, a channel dedicated to discussion, debate and argument on a whole array of topics. Today, Greg and I discuss the increasing spread of the coronavirus, where the United States now has the most infections out of all of the countries in the world. And even Mexico are banning US citizens from crossing its borders. So let's take a listen to that debate. Welcome to Richard and Greg. It's Friday, the 27th of March, 2020, and it's just about 11:10 a.m. GMT. Now, this is our usual every other day coronavirus update, but the interesting thing in the headlines that I've noticed is that the number of infections in the United States has now surpassed any other country in the world. But this is the irony, published by the BBC this morning. Headline: Coronavirus. Mexicans demand crackdown on Americans crossing the border. Can you imagine it? The Mexicans are now wishing to prevent United States residents from crossing the border into Mexico. So without further ado, let's go over to Controversially Greg and A, get an update on the current situation, and B, on his take of this rather ironic situation. Good morning, Greg.
Good morning. Perhaps this is just the excuse Trump wanted to try and persuade the Mexicans to pay for the wall. Could it all be another con, a false flag, conspiracy? I think not. It's hard to get 548,806 people to conspire in a conspiracy. And that's how many cases of coronavirus are currently declared. Though I would stress, I believe this is way underestimate. When you look at the figures for America that say 85,000, yet they are testing virtually nobody. How do they know how many people have it? Is somebody sucking the figures out of their thumb? Or is there some sort of guidance coming in with different countries around the world having different policies on counting things? It is also true that different states in America, it being a federation of states, are actually reflecting in different ways. But that is still over 500,000 people, whichever way you look at it as a total. And we are still talking within the next few minutes, probably, of 25,000 deaths recorded so far and attributed to the virus. It's also worth noting that there seem to be very, very few deaths relative to the number of cases in Germany. So I did a bit of digging, and in Germany, if you die of a heart attack, the fact that it's caused by COVID-19 does not reflect on your death certificate. Your death certificate says heart attack. So people dying of pleurisy because of the virus and people dying of heart attacks and other side effects are not recording on the figures that are going out worldwide as COVID-19 deaths. So that is some indication of just how inaccurate these figures are. We must treat them with a pinch of salt. They are all, without exception, underestimates. There seem to be no areas where the estimate is overestimating. So I think we could safely more than double these figures and still be inside the total that is actually occurring. For instance, in sub-Saharan Africa, there are very, very few cases recorded. But then again, very few people in sub-Saharan Africa have any access to professional medicine. A tiny number in percentage terms will have been checked. Various areas like Somalia and Sudan are in basically open warfare, and they are killing people wholesale in their own civil wars. Multitudes of people die in the Congo in their very, very dodgy mining practices, and so on and so forth. So take the figures with a pinch of salt, but be aware that this is a deeply concerning issue. Having said, take them with a pinch of salt, a quick take. There are now 199 countries involved. I would hazard a guess that very few people realize there were 199 countries on the planet, but 199 countries have presented with cases so far. And you'll find that the big numbers are coming from the countries that have better medical facilities. As Richard pointed out, America has now overtaken China in terms of the number of cases, and Italy has overtaken China in terms of the number of deaths. So this is going to run and run. There is no sign that there is any downturn anywhere in the world, in that I don't believe we can believe what is being reported from China.
Well, on that note, obviously, certainly as far as the Western world is concerned, but it's happening around the globe, there is now a move to almost complete isolation. So people are told to self-isolate, not go out, only shop when absolutely necessary. Now, there will be families, for example, who may have a month's worth of food and water and whatever provisions stored up. But there's bound to be a time where even they will have to go out into the local supermarket. And one of the concerns that I have is, even though people are told to keep a distance, we are hearing medical professionals saying that if someone has the coronavirus and they cough or they breathe it out in some way, it can actually stay in the air for a reasonable amount of time. So even though someone is 6 feet away from me in the supermarket, when I eventually walk into their space with them having moved on, I'm prone to catching that virus, am I not? Or have I missed an important medical point?
No, you are prone to it. Your chances of getting it, if you are within 2 or 3 feet and they sneeze, are considerably higher. And it's percentages that matter here. The droplets from expectorant coughs and sneezes leave the human body at anything up to, if people don't bother covering their mouth or nose, which they should do by putting immediately sneezing into the crook of their elbow. So this idea of knocking elbows as opposed to shaking hands is probably not the best idea, as there is an element of capture of the virus by people on the sleeve of their vehicle, of their shirt or jacket. So the actual expectorant from a sneeze or cough, if uninterrupted, travels approximately 10 feet.
Mm-hmm.
And realistically, you can't be expected to keep people 10 feet apart. The aisles in supermarkets are rarely 10 feet wide. Anybody who has sneezed in that aisle, it has gone on to the packaging, but you're talking of percentages. You reduce the percentage chance by sensible, common sense precautions. I haven't been into a supermarket because I happen to be in the kill zone. So my wife goes in and does the shopping when needed. She usually goes on her own, but if I want to change the scenery, I play driver. And she goes into the supermarket wearing a mask and gloves. Now, the mask will not guarantee her protection. it is more likely to guarantee other people's protection in the supermarket if she is a carrier. However, one thing she's noticed is that she's one of very few people wearing masks at the moment in our area. And one thing that she has noticed is because she has a mask on and gloves, people are keeping at least 2 meters away from her. Whereas if she isn't, they forget the safety of distance. It's acting as a reminder to them as to what they should be doing, staying 2 meters away from everybody. So it's worth wearing a mask, even if it doesn't protect you, because it makes people stay away from you. There was a lovely tweet put out the other day that said, if you really want people to stay away from you in Britain, it's not a bad idea to wear a T-shirt saying vote Liberal Democrat. And I can incline to concur with that. However, there are very few places in the country now that you could say vote Corbyn and have anybody within a mile of you. For fear of being far too political, I merely thought those instances were quite humorous. As with Diane Abbott's idea that we should stop filming Holby City and Casualty and redeploy all the nurses back to the health service, which would be about her standard of understanding of things, but if a little cruel at this stage.
Yeah, the most amusing image I saw that is doing the rounds, and the one good thing, I suppose, about this country to a degree, is whilst everyone is feeling pretty miserable about what's going on, there are quite humorous videos or pictures going around. And the latest one is a farmer in his field, ploughing the field, ready to plant some crops. And behind him is his wife putting toilet rolls into the furrow that he has just ploughed, which actually tickled me in view of the toilet roll obsession that currently exists.
And what I don't understand about this toilet roll obsession is, for God's sake, most of the manifestation of this is a relatively minor cold that moves very rapidly through a cough to pleurisy. What the hell would people have bought out in the supermarkets if it had been like the mid-1820s when we had a near pandemic across Europe of cholera?
It's a fair point. I think to some degree, it's not so much because it's toilet rolls, it's because they are regarded as something people need relatively quickly and they run out of very fast. And people realize, and I have to admit this, as much as those who stacked their houses full of food in the early days quite rightly were condemned because they've left very little for other people. If we reach the stage, which is quite possible, whereby even going to the supermarket poses an enormous risk of contagion, these people now, with their fridges and their cupboards full of food and whatever, they don't need to go out anymore, and they can spend a month or two without coming into contact with anyone else. So in an ironic way, perhaps they will have been proven to have been the wise ones, and those who've turned around and said, no, it's all morally wrong to do this, could actually be the ones now becoming infected because they have to go out to those supermarkets. Because in the early days, the level of infection was small. Now, of course, as each day goes on, it increases.
I think that the big problem throughout this is the politicizing of it by certain areas, and also the endless specious virtue signaling. And, picking on people because they did what they could, like buying toilet rolls. People were told to stockpile to start with.
Yes, they were. That's true. Well, Greg,
my cough is continuing. I've had it for 6 weeks now, but which gives me the impression it probably isn't coronavirus.
Unless, of course, you were the original instigator of it and you're just a permanent carrier, Greg, which I would
Yeah,
not rule out.
I'm doing it purely and simply so that we can do podcasts. Two things that I would like to quickly mention.
Hmm.
One particularly, well, I think both are important. Today, there's been an announcement in Britain that the government has issued something of an edict to local government to find ways to house all of the homeless. Now, about 2 months ago, I believe it was with Marcus, I did a podcast which I will draw to Richard's attention, and perhaps he might like to transfer it on to here, as to how homelessness can be readily and fairly inexpensively dealt with in any country in the world, and done with simpatico from the point of view of the person who is homeless, whether they're homeless because of poverty, whether they're homeless because of alcoholism, stupidity, mental health, or purely choice. And there are some who do not wish to live in accommodation as such. And there are itinerants around who just wander around, used to be called tramps. So we put forward a fairly inexpensive solution that can be used by any local authority or any government anywhere in the world. I'll point out where it is to Richard, and he may care to transfer it onto the Richard and Greg channel.
And your other point, Greg?
My other point is a big gap in my memory. I knew it was very important, and I've now forgotten it.
Well, if I was a little mercenary, I could say, of course, the ramifications of this coronavirus could potentially be so great. There'll be so many deaths, there will be plenty of homes around to house anyone who requires one.
Oh, I think that is very strongly possible, despite the fact that we have curtailed building of houses. We could also find that as a result of the coronavirus, we are able to repatriate many of the illegal immigrants who have come into our country and are, quite honestly, unwelcome. If they've turned their own country because of their various superstitions into a nightmare and now want to live in ours, I would suggest they go back to their own country and improve it, just as we have spent many years trying to improve our country. And also, something else that it hasn't been said very openly is that the package of fairly generous giveaway that appears to be coming from the government to cope with this issue and the lockdown and people's inability to earn their wages or income in whatever way they earn it as a result of the lockdown is positive rather than negative when you look at our country, in that when the Tories took over after 13 years of Labour misrule, we then found the note in the Treasury saying there's no money left, which was basically true. As a result, the Tories have had 10 years of enforcing austerity to try to recoup the situation. Also, bear in mind that during the Blair-Brown era, there was tremendous amount of selling off of the NHS by the Labour government through, in the main, government shared cost on producing hospitals or selling them on what is effectively a leaseback basis. Net result, we are paying 2 and 3 times for our hospitals as a result of financing some of the other follies that were introduced during those 13 years. Austerity has not made the government popular, but at least it has put us in a position to be able to afford the bill. And another aspect of affording that bill is, in this instance, this particular virus would appear to have a much higher level of fatality for the older sector of the population. That is not to say the young don't die of it. However, the overwhelming preponderance of deaths are amongst those over 70, although it starts to escalate from about 50 onwards. But most will be over the age of 70. And this will liberate a huge amount of money for the government because they are all pensioners drawing a pension. And imagine if our death toll eventually went to 500,000 or 1 million or higher. Imagine what an incredible saving that will make for the government. And when you think that almost every Western country has totally unrepayable debt due in the main to their pension structure, because everybody is living much longer, we are healthier than we have ever been, we live to a higher standard of living than we ever have, the percentage of people who live in poverty and starvation is smaller than it has ever been in history. This appalling world that the likes of Greta Thunberg are trying to con everyone into believing exists, world on fire and the like, is actually the best era on this planet to have lived in terms of housing, clothing, jobs, income. There is no area that is worse. We now have 37 million cars in Britain, which with a population of 67 million is a staggering number. And this is purely the wealth of the people. So don't despair. We will come out of this. There are going to be aspects of it that are awful, aspects that will be tragic, and many who listen to this will have friends and family who don't make it.
Well, Greg, thank you for that. I will just end on 2 points. The first is, of course, we started this off with the potential conspiracy theory of this virus and why it was created. And of course, to add to that, if you wanted to get rid of your pensions problem and your national health expense problem, having a virus that essentially killed the old and the infirm and the ill, then to some degree, you've now kicked that can down the road once this virus has fulfilled its destiny. Having said that, I will take issue, and this won't be now for debate because we haven't got the time, but perhaps in a different podcast. Whilst I would agree with you that under the Labour government, we ended up with the 2008 financial crisis, although it wasn't totally the Labour government's fault. But with regards to your argument that the Conservatives, through saving money and austerity, has enabled them to afford the crisis that we now have, the facts state the opposite. In 2005, the national debt was £500 billion. In 2011, when the Tories took over, or they took over in 2010, the national debt then rose to £1 trillion. And by 2016, after 5 years of Tory rule, the national debt rose to £1.5 trillion. And as of March 2019, the national debt was £1.8 trillion. So I have to say to you that the Tories have more than doubled the national debt since coming to power.
I don't disagree with you for a moment. However, you will notice this is based on the structure that there was no ways they could pay the pension bill that had accrued over the years, nor was there any way that they could continue funding the health service with its additional expense of buying back its own hospitals.
But let's debate that on another day. I will just argue with you. I do not believe the Tories were austere. I think they were more austere than perhaps Labour would have been. But quite frankly, the level of debt to GDP, it's more than doubled under the Tories. So let's talk about that again. Greg, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
We hope you enjoyed that discussion, and if so, kindly subscribe to our channel and press the bell sign so that you are notified of our videos as and when they are published. And also in the description box below, we place links to certain books, articles and programs which you may find of benefit, and for which we will receive a small commission should you purchase through our link. And this will help support our channel and to enable us to develop it further.